When the U.S. moves ships, money, and diplomats around Latin America, Americans hear migration, drug war, and democracy. In Beijing, analysts hear something very different. Are they coming after our supply lines, our partners, and eventually Taiwan? I spent over 20 years in U.S. intelligence, and in this briefing, we're going to flip the map and walk through how China's analysts likely read U.S. activity in Latin America and why that matters for Taiwan, global shipping, and your cost of living. Here's what we're going to do in the next 10 minutes. I'm going to build the Chinese analyst map of Latin America, look at 3 types of U.S. moves that they're going to track, and connect that to Taiwan, shipping lanes, and prices you actually feel. This is not about cheering for Washington or Beijing for that matter. This is about understanding how a professional in a Chinese intelligence shop is paid to think. We're going to start with one question. If you're sitting in Beijing, why care about Latin America at all? You're looking at 3 things: resources, oil, gas, copper, lithium, food, votes, countries in Latin America that can back you in the UN and other forums, and access, ports, telecoms, infrastructure that gives you presence near the U.S. homeland. Now, Chinese analysts don't see America's backyard. They see a pressure point against U.S. influence and a way to reduce dependence on Western suppliers. So when the U.S. steps up operations, sanctions, or military presence in that region, Chinese analysts ask, is this about local crime or about cutting into our energy partners and leverage? Now, inside a Chinese think tank or intelligence unit, they're watching 3 big categories: basing and presence, so new U.S. access to ports, airfields, radar sites, Navy, Coast Guard, or Marine deployments in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, sanctions and legal tools, drug kingpin labels, corruption lists, terror designations, anything that locks out a government or company from the dollar system. Narrative campaigns suddenly focus on authoritarian regimes in the region, stories that paint governments close to Beijing as unstable or criminal. Now, for Beijing, each of these is a signal. Is Washington preparing to limit our access or just managing local disorder? Now, you tie this to Taiwan. Chinese planners worry about encirclement, U.S. alliances in East Asia, U.S. control of key sea lanes, and now U.S. activity ramping up in Latin America. From their point of view, if Washington can pressure Chinese partners in Latin America, think energy suppliers, debtors, port projects, then in a Taiwan crisis, the U.S. isn't just fighting around the island. It's squeezing China's fuel, food, and cash from the other side of the world. So when China sees more U.S. military cooperation with Latin states or more sanctions against pro-Beijing regimes, they file that under potential tools the U.S. can activate in a Taiwan showdown. It's not decisive by itself, but it's another chess piece on the board. We'll go to shipping next. China's economy depends on long, vulnerable sea routes from the Middle East to Indian Ocean to the South China Sea, Latin America to Pacific routes to Chinese ports. Chinese analysts look at U.S. presence near the Panama Canal, key choke points in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, partner ports where U.S. Navy ships visit regularly. And their question is simple. In a crisis, how quickly could the U.S. and its partners slow, inspect, or discourage ships headed to China from Latin America? They're not just afraid of a dramatic blockade, they're afraid of a slow squeeze. Insurance costs go up, delays at ports, security inspections on ships tied to Chinese firms. That's how a regional move in Latin America becomes a global logistics risk for Beijing. So what does any of this have to do with you and your wallet? Well, 3 things. Energy prices. If U.S. pressure makes Chinese access to Latin American energy riskier, Beijing looks for alternatives. That competition for secure energy can push global prices up. You also have food and raw materials. Latin America is a major exporter of soy, meat, and metals. If China has to pay more or reroute shipping, those costs ripple into global food and global prices. Supply chain shocks. Any U.S.-China friction shocks shipping lanes, and that means it delays with higher freight costs. And so when you see a story about U.S. patrols, sanctions, or anti-corruption campaigns in Latin America, understand someone in Beijing is gaming out how that might hit their imports. And those reactions can end up on your grocery bill. Next time you see U.S. activity in Latin America, run this 3-step check. Spot the partner. Is the country or company deeply tied to China for loans, ports, or energy? Locate the port or route. Is there a canal, a major port, or a key shipping route nearby? Then measure the pressure. Is the U.S. move legal, military, or narrative? Ask, could this make Chinese access riskier or more expensive? If the answer is yes on all three, you're not just looking at a local operation. You're looking at a move that China's analysts will file under potential Taiwan and shipping pressure. So to recap, China sees Latin America as resources, votes, and access near the U.S. U.S. moves in the region are read as potential tools in a wider contest, including over Taiwan. Shipping lanes and partner pressure can ripple all the way to your cost of living. If you keep thinking in slogans, you miss the game. If you flip the map and follow the flows, you're closer to how professionals on both sides look at it. So, if you want disciplined, nonpartisan intelligence on how the world really works, stick around. This is an ongoing briefing cycle, not a one-off rant. Like, subscribe, comment. That gets us in front of more eyes and ears. And as always, stay safe out there.